Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Vincent and this is a bit of a beginner-friendly tutorial because in this video I want to explain you the best way to switch from Octane to Redshift, and I want to talk everything what is important in Redshift, like the basic settings, where are certain buttons, and like the easy way to go and to start with this render engine. And I switched actually a couple of years ago, so perhaps some of the information I'm giving you here it's a bit old, or perhaps Octane already updated the stuff. But yeah, I will try to give you my best impressions, why I like Redshift more, and as I said, everything else, like the basic stuff. And therefore, let's directly start into Cinema 4D. So we are now in Cinema 4D, and you can see I already have my special layout for Redshift here, and I created a simple scene, which is currently not rendering, that's why it looks a bit blurred, but I want to start at the very beginning. Probably your Cinema 4D is looking like this. And we want to create our own working space. I have two of them, 16:9 and 1:1. If I click them, you can see it's easier to work in a horizontal work space and more in a vertical. Wait, I just switched it. Just think the other way around. Yeah, again, so we are going to back to the start screen, and first, let's get some stuff. So first of all, I think you won't see this Redshift part here because Cinema tried to implement it into their workflow. So first of all, we need to go to the preferences, and I want this menu to be back. So when you have Redshift installed, or I think anyway, this Redshift part is now in Cinema 4D always, but you can compare this one with yours. So first of all, I don't want to render with the CPU because it's incredibly slow. So if you have this ticked on, mostly your renderings will be slower than without it. So always leave this off. Then here's my cache folder. I have 256 gigabytes of cache, which is also definitely more than the default one. It's good to have some cache. Then let me see, I think this part, exactly, that's the one, Redshift main menu. In the default setting, this is off, but I want it to be on so that we will see this part there again. And I think in the default setting, the node materials for presets is on, but I turned it off because I still want to work with the old Espresso system. It's a bit annoying and tedious UI-wise, but performance-wise, it's still faster, and I had way less bugs in the Espresso workflow than in the node materials. And for now, I will stick with the Espresso one. Anyway, because everyone in the industry and everyone I know is still using the old system, so I'm doing the same. And again, then it's way easier to change shaders when you work together. So this button goes off and this button goes on. Then you are already done with the setting here. As the next thing, you have this Redshift menu visible, and we want to see the render viewer. So that's the render viewer. And as the next thing, I want to see the shader graph editor. And you can see this is already the material which was applied in the beginning, but we will go a bit more basic for the one we are building. Just the quick thing, you can drag and drop like your layout like you like it. I don't know, like this is very handy, for example, and then you can just save the whole layout as something new. So customize, save layout as, and then you have your Redshift working workflow. So I already had that. And going back to Redshift 101 thing, then, okay, next thing, let's first create a new material and then we will talk about everything going on. So we need to create Redshift material. And this was the old material, but they made an update not so long ago, which is called standard material. And you should definitely use the standard material because it has way better energy conservation. That means when, for example, a glass material is rough, it doesn't get too dark. Before that, it was always too dark, but now it looks more realistic. And anyway, the whole system is more realistic, and especially subsurface scattering got way more easy. So let's select the material and apply it to our object here. And for now, I don't want to see the materials on the side here, so I can hide them. And we are back into my setup here. And then let's get rid of everything Redshift related. And let's press the play button here. And this starts and stops your IPR. Here you can refresh your IPR. This is the RT button, which will activate the real-time rendering, but it's not, well, I kind of don't use it, so you don't have to use it as well. Then in this button, you can preview certain channels. This button I never use, show output before denoising. Yeah, I never use this. This is very handy. You can render a region, drag it around, or you can also press Shift and then left click and then you can create your own render region. Then you can select a camera, and we are rendering in the tele camera, so it is correct. Anyway, you can go auto, or you can, I don't know, render everything from the front. And let's get rid of the preview, and then there's nothing, or perspective, or yeah, whatever you want. So we'll go with auto. Then lock the camera. I actually never go with this button because the automatic will mostly work fine for me. Because anyway, for my workflow, I have this main window here, and I have separated my views. I have 2 instead of 4 here, and I'm mostly working on the right one. And you can see now auto is not the right one, it's render. So you can do everything on your mesh here. You can also make this window big, I don't know, do something, and the render will always stay the same. So I like this separation from the 2 views here. Then let's make our rendering bigger again, and we don't need the render view here on the side. Then as a next thing, this is the bucket rendering. This is the final quality. Like now we have a progressive renderer, so we move the camera and we have an instant update. And with this one, I mean, I can show you and then you can see what's happening. We got the buckets and now we're rendering in final quality. And what means final quality? So let's go onto the right to the render settings. And we need to obviously change our render to Redshift. So you would have to do this in the beginning. I forgot to say this. I think the standard is on standard. So switch to Redshift and then you can make your usual adjustments. For example, if you want to render only 1 frame, an animation, which resolution. And now we can see we are still rendering buckets. So let's turn that off. I have this Instagram format here already applied because I have my own render settings already adjusted here, but we will skip this for now. Then you just go for the saving. I'm going with EXRs here, but again, for very detailed stuff and all this stuff, I think I would definitely recommend you to go to my Patreon and subscribe there because I will talk more about advanced stuff there. So for now, this is the main window you will be dealing with. It's called Redshift, and there are 2 options. There's basic and advanced. The advanced tab, we're not going to go in here. Again, this is Patreon stuff. We will just easily go with the basic stuff. And we have some options for the quality. So I never use very high because this is like intense render quality, and actually I never use high. And if you select the high, for example, you can click on this little button and you can see how accurate the adaptive threshold is for the automatic sampling and the automatic rendering. And 0.01 is mostly good enough with me, especially for animations. And I do a bit of denoising later in compositing, so 0.01 is definitely good enough here. But you have to fine tune this with your computer, how quick it is or how slow. But we'll go with medium. Then denoising, we won't denoise in the renderer. Motion blur is very important. If we render animations, we obviously need motion blur. And if the object itself is deforming, then we also need deformation blur. And I will try to quickly explain what's the difference. So let's pause this render here. And if the object is moving around like this, then it's motion blur. If the object itself is deforming, especially, for example, if there's a cloth tag on it and the object is folding in itself, then Redshift wouldn't know any motion blur if you have only motion blur on. So you will definitely need deformation blur here as well. It can be something a bit tricky. It takes a bit of calculation time, and you can also play around with the steps if it's not correct, but I don't go higher than 3 because, as I said, it's very intense for calculation. I would always recommend, first of all, going only with 2. Then obviously global illumination we need, otherwise it would look crap. And then you can adjust some values here. You can adjust them even in the basic one because they are actually super basic. The combined one, that's how many passes we can combine from all the things together. And global illumination passes, we have 7 here. That's a good start. And for the beginning, I wouldn't change this value. If you have a very dark room where you want to have a lot of GI going on, then you can increase this number, but then the renderer gets lower. Reflection with 4, pretty good. Refraction has 9 in here, and I think that's not the default. Yeah, the default is 6, and that means how often a ray can go through a glass material. And I will try to show you this, what that means. So in the standard material, we can activate the glass part. And let's make this a little bit bigger here. So we have transmission on 0. So let's put that up on 1. And then we have a glass material. And let's put down the reflection to 1. Now you can see we have only one pass of rays which can go through the glass, and then it stops calculating. And when it stops calculating, it will render it as black. So 2 is already quite alright, because anyway, we have a super flat object. We won't need many passes here. But let's see with 3, 4, and you can see the 4 gave us a few more passes here. 5, and let's make it, I don't know, drastic, 15. And now you can see all the black part is gone here. Let's try to find the sweet spot where the black's clipped away at 11. Let's go for 9. Yeah, I think somewhere around that. 8 gives us a little bit more black here. So I think we could be fine with 8 or 9. And then when we have 9 refraction, we also want to have more combined passes if we need the other ones as well. And you can see this rendering looks definitely way better than the default of 6. In 6 we have these black areas. But be very, very careful with these numbers, because Redshift is rendering glass like very slowly, and the render time will increase a lot when you increase this number here. And then, well, the same goes for reflection. For example, if you have very many reflective objects, then you need a higher number here. Then the next thing is called ray tracing RT. And I usually have this off while I'm working, because sometimes it takes a while. It's always saying calculating RT, and I have the feeling that the calculating takes a lot of time, especially on the PC at the office, where I have 4 2080 cards. They're a bit older, and I think the ray tracing wasn't as good as that it's now, so it takes a lot of time to calculate, which is annoying to work. But obviously, if I'm finished with the project, I turn this on, and then most of the time the renderings are really like 20% faster. So this is pretty good. But we are here now on a very basic scene, and I am recording in my home, which has one 3090 card, and the communication is a bit quicker here. So if I work at home, sometimes I have this even on if the scene is not too heavy. If it's too heavy, I turn it off. So you can see a few frames here going all good. Then this is the basic adjustment for your render settings, which we were talking about the bucket. Then you can freeze tessellation and freeze geometry. We will skip this. You can have a look onto your clay rendering or samples, but we'll go with regular. But sometimes it's really useful to see, for example, how your light looks without any shading. This one is for focus picking. You can select one object in a scene, click on it, and then you have a focus. Focus. To be able to see a focus, you will have to apply a Redshift camera tag onto your camera, and I think they are now on the camera tag itself. I don't see the tag itself. I have to restart Cinema because I changed my screen resolution. So we are back, and now I can also see my tags here. And now, well, this tag used to be somewhere else, but now it's in the camera tag. So let's apply the camera tag to our camera, and we can activate the bokeh effect, which is the depth of field. And let's try to make this more obvious. If we go very close, let's get rid of our glass material, then it renders way faster. You can see now everything is blurred, and when we pick the focus, by the way, if you click on this little icon here, you can see the full menu bar if, for example, your render window is too small. So let's select the material picker, the focus picker, and you can pick the focus now. To the bokeh, I don't want to have focus and the radius. I only want to use the focus because I want to be able to adjust everything by myself. So the radius is kind of the intensity of the bokeh. For example, if I go 5, which is pretty high, then you can see nearly everything is blurred. And the power is how intense the bokeh itself is. Probably in this window it's hard to see, but if you have many small objects, you can see the intensity of the bokeh is stronger. And yeah, the rest we will ignore for now, but let's go with a very small value here, and let's put our object back in place, and again pick the focus, and we have depth of field with the right focus here. Then this menu picks the object. So for example, if I something else selected, and in the render I select this object, and it automatically selects here. I don't use this a lot because my structure is very organized, so I'm not searching for objects, but this one is pretty nice and I use it a lot, especially if you have a lot of scenes. You can pick the material itself. So let's select another material. And let's say we want to select this one. We have this button activated and just click onto the scene. And on the left, you can see the shader graph automatically switched to the material which we're using here. Then you can put everything to a snapshot. I don't use this. I always use snapshot to picture viewer. So you can have many images in here and I don't know, compare certain things. And we'll talk about the light in a little bit, but let's say we want to compare the difference between these two, and then I have both of them into my picture viewer, which is really nice. Then picture viewer, copy from buffer. I never used that. Then this setting here, this is, I always use fit window. So depending on the size, this window will always scale correctly, but you can also scale in the original size. This is my render output size. And if you want it very big, you can go original size. But I usually go not original, fit window. And if I want like a detail, for example, you can duplicate your camera and I don't know, go very close and see how it looks. And I don't know, this one wouldn't need a bokeh. And then you can just switch back your cameras. Or you can fix scaling and then you can change the zoom here. But my workflow is mostly fit window and then just go closer to the object if I need it. The settings here, I'm actually never in there, so I would ignore this for now. In the camera tag itself, you can adjust a few things. You can put on streak, flares, bloom, you can play around with the exposure, but I'll try to not do too much of these post effects because I could do post effects later on in DaVinci if I want to, and it's better to render a clean window and just do the effects later on. But yeah, if you want, you can put stuff onto the camera here. Let's have a little talk about the lights. And in my scene, I want to start with a dome light. That's the same as the HDR light in Octane. Or how's it called? HDR dome light as well. I forgot how it was called in Octane. In the dome light, you need to go to the texture and apply an HDRI here. And I'm using a free one. So yeah, you can apply any HDR in here if you want. And by the way, Cinema just crashed, so that's why my material is glass again. Let's give it, I don't know, a bit of a color, something like that. And in the HDRI, you can turn the dome light around. And perhaps it's even more better visible if I turn down the roughness to 0, so it's very glossy. And actually I need to make the material darker so you can see the reflection a bit better. And let's turn the dome light around and you can see in the material that we got the dome light here. And you just have to move the light around till you find an angle which works for you. My usual workflow is that I only use the dome light to fill up some of the shadows and give it a bit of a nice reflection, and I shape the rest of the object with softboxes. So you can leave the intensity at 1, but I'll drop the exposure to 0.2, for example, or you can go darker or brighter. Then this is quite handy in here. We have a slider with the saturation. I don't remember this in Octane. Perhaps they have it these days. But yeah, it's quite nice, especially if your dome light is too saturated. You can just drop down the saturation by 50%, and now you can see that the colors are a bit desaturated here. So going back again with a bright material, and let's see. Let's activate the rim light, and I only want to see the rim light. You can see that there's a teeny tiny bit happening. For the rim light, it's a basic area light, and you can press Shift C and type for area light, and here we go. And on top of the area light I have a target tag, and I just have a target to my center null, which is currently not in the center, but let's change that. So my object is not in the center, and let's see, our coordinates are pretty off. So I could actually press Alt 0 and then we have a PSR reset, and then we can on the left just adjust our camera here. So now we are all in 000, which is always pretty nice to work. And now I only have to work onto my rotation to find like some interesting angle. And or was the actually the other side was a bit more interesting with this fold. I liked it. Something like that. Cool. So we wanted to talk about our rim light. And the rim light, well, first of all, my lights are hidden, so let's turn them back on. So I have a light coming from the top right and it's quite from the back. So it's a rim light, I would say. But it's doing a little bit too little, so therefore let's scale it up. And the bigger a light source is, the softer the light is, and the smaller the light is, the harder the shadows are. And I want it a bit softer, so I'm making it a bit bigger and putting it a bit closer. And now we can see we have a little bit of something going on from the back. Then let's turn on the top light as well. And because our object is very small, we can also move the lights closer. And the closer we are going with the light, the more the difference is between like the top where we hit a lot of light. As you can see, the bottom doesn't nearly get any light. The light fall off is always very quick. And to show you this again, we can put everything in the picture viewer and let's move the light like pretty far away and let's make the intensity a bit more strong. And we need to move the light a bit more to the front. And now you can see the light intensity from top to the bottom is nearly the same. So we have a lot of light here and less here, and now it's more even. So depending on your art style, you have to adjust your lights, but probably you know this from Octane as well. This is nothing new here. Then this looks pretty nice here, I would say. Then let's activate our dome light again. So we got the nice GI bouncing here. And let's make it darker to even something like -1. And I would say this looks pretty good. Then let's hide the lights again. Then let's have a look onto our material. So now we need to focus onto the left part, the shader graph. And I don't do much on the right part here, so we can scale this a little bit down. And usually you have more space. I don't have too much because I cranked up the resolution for the scaling, so for the recording, so that you see something. Okay, then the one on the left. Probably if you open this is gonna look like this because I have this node panel deactivated because I don't need it. Because you can also, if you are in here, you can press Shift C as well, and then you can just type anything which you have in mind. For example, bump, and then you can drag and drop this in here. And I know all this stuff, so it's quicker for me to just Shift C and type everything. But I would say for the beginning, it's really good that you have everything in here and you can open the stuff and see what nodes are in there and just select the ones you need and drag and drop them in here. For example, the bump has a bump blender and a bump map. You can just drag and drop displacement blender, same things. Okay, then we want to start with the material, and that's a texture, and we need a texture. So we can drag and drop this thing in here, and then we need to load a texture into the path. And let's try to just recreate any 3D material, and probably all of you are having a lot of texture materials, and I will actually try to recreate one of the materials which I did for my texture pack. And let's start with the diffuse material. Then I want to show you the coolest thing which Redshift has, which Octane doesn't, and I'm using this like 1,000 times a day. And you can preview this material on itself. So you can put this to the output, and then we see how the material itself looks. And I'm using this so often that I even created a shortcut for this, and that's pretty nice. So you can go to Customize and Customize Palette. And the thing you want to search is Connect Node to Output. So Connect Node to Output. And this is the one here. And you can see there's already a shortcut. I created a C. So you select this one, you assign the shortcut which you want. In my case, I used a C, then you assign it, and you can directly execute it. But just you need to click Assign, and then you can close it. And for me, that means that every time I have a material, I can preview this. So for example, we will definitely need more than the diffuse. For example, we will need, I don't know, the roughness. And you can also just drag and drop materials onto existing fields into the path here. Then we select it, press C, and then we have a preview for our roughness. Then what do we do with all this stuff? So the diffuse material goes into the base color. Then let's reconnect our material with the output. Then we need to create a bump map, and for the bump map, we need a normal material. By the way, if Cinema forgot where the object is lying, you can also just click Locate Image, and then it's opening the folder where the files are, and then we can select the normal map and just drag and drop it in here. then we need to connect our normal object with the bump input. The bump input goes into this blue top thingy here, and then you can select where it should go. Or there's another way when you know in the, wait, where I never do it like this. So you can also just drag and drop things to this window here. For example, in the reflect, we can just drag and drop the reflection roughness to the output. But in this case, we want to use the bump output, and the bump output is in base property geometry. And then we need to select the bump input. Then you can see everything's updating, but it will look wrong because two things. First of all, this is a normal map, and in the bump map, we have selected height field. This is the black and white bump. So we need to switch this to normal. And then when we switch everything to normal, we need to also change the color space. In this case, we can't use auto, which is a bit unfortunate. We need to go and switch it to raw. And if we switch it to raw, everything looks nice again. So we have these, we have that. Next thing, we can adjust the reflection roughness. And there's one thing I really like to do is to create a ramp. And we select the material, put it again into blue part, put it into the input thing, and then we select the output and put it into the reflection roughness. And the cool thing about this ramp is that, let's press C to preview this material, and it's a bit like a color correction. I mean, this is the same as an Octane. A black material is 100% glossiness, and a white material is 100% matte. Let's preview our material, and let's say we want it to be a bit more reflective. That means we just need to add a bit more from the black parts in here. Now, it's probably hard to see because it's a cloth and we have so much bump going on, but the material is a bit more reflective now. But let's say I want to only adjust it a little bit. Then we are good with this, and let's have a look onto our whole thing. Then the next thing, we want to create a displacement. So I still have my displacement node here, or you can press Shift C and type displacement, or you can just drag and drop it from the side. And the displacement, this is the only thing which is not connected to the material itself. You need to connect the displacement to the output. So into the blue part, and then the first slider is already called displacement. And displacement is a bit different than an Octane, because it depends on the tessellation. So it depends on how many polygons the object itself has. And our object here is not so high polyed. But let's see. Well, first of all, we need another material. And again, you forgot the path. That's unfortunate. So let's open this window again and drag and drop our displacement. And let's have a look onto the actual displacement material. It has only very little displacement. So there's very little contrast in this image, and I want to increase the contrast. So we got more displacement and it's a bit easier to show here. So therefore I will duplicate the ramp and I will put the texture into the ramp, then into displacement, and then into the object. Then we can increase the contrast, and we definitely need a bit more from the white because the material is pretty black. And the cool thing again about Redshift is that you don't have to guess how much you have to put one slider to the other slider. For example, if I would have thought, yeah, this is perfect, put it into this displacement, and nothing would work because it's just all black. So we definitely need to put the white areas a bit more in, and now you can start to see that we have a good contrast here, and now we have a lot of displacement. Perhaps the contrast is even a bit too strong, and let's make it something like this. And in general, a good notice that you have an average gray value for the displacement. So let's select the standard material again, preview it by pressing C, and then you're probably wondering, like, why isn't anything happening? I have a scale of 10, which is huge, and nothing is happening. And that's because you need to assign a Redshift tag to the object as well. So let's select the object, and let's see where the tag is these days. So as I said, there was a Redshift menu with all the tags, but I need to search as well, because in my default scene, the tags are already in the scene. But now they are in render tags, and in the middle we have Redshift object. Then we need to go to the geometry part, and also your Redshift tag will definitely look different. That's because I have a preset here, and exactly, that's the default one. Let's work with the default. So we need to override our tessellation. That means we need to enable the tessellation and we need to enable the displacement. Then I never use screen space adaptivity. That's a complex topic. I will leave this out for now. Let's just turn this off. I want smooth subdivisions and my minimum edge length will be 0. And for now, let's try with a maximum subdivisions of 3. And we are now, but perhaps you get the feeling that we are just guessing random values, but there's a very nice way to see that. So in the shader, I select the wireframe. Let's press C again, which is my shortcut, to preview how the geometry actually looks. And this is now my mesh, and you can see it's pretty highly detailed. There's a lot of tessellation going on. So let's zoom out again, and this is just with 1 tessellation, with 2, with 3, that's what we had, and with 4, and I would say with 4 we are already at a place where you have to be very careful. I mean, in our case, if you have a very low poly mesh, then some other values would work for you as well. But you can see the mesh is like super detailed now. The thing is, why I'm showing you this is, I don't know, let's say we have one mesh and let's preview our material again. And one mesh is definitely clean enough that the geometry is all smoothed out on all edges. In this case, it's the same at the subdivision surface, but it's quicker because the tessellation happens in the render engine. But for displacement, the more subdivisions we have in the displacement, the nicer the displacement looks. Then you can see there's one problem that our classes are kinda moving into each other, and that's because the default displacement goes from 0 to 1. So we only have a positive displacement, but we want the displacement to go like into the object a little bit and out to the object. So my first try is always go like in the exact middle. So the middle is to go minus 0.5 and positive 0.5. And then we can see where we're starting. So you can see the problem's gone where we have the geometry intersecting here, but now we have too much negative displacement going on here. So let's try to go with 0.3 and 0.7. So we have a bit of a negative displacement, but mostly positive. But in this case, we still have problems. And that's really, this geometry is quite unique because it's so flat at some parts. And in general, 0.5 and 0.5 works very well. But let's go with 0.8 and 0.2. And this does the trick for here now. We don't have any displacement poking through the material itself. And that's all looking nice. Then let's also drop down the scale for the texture. We don't need a displacement of 10. I would say like 2 or 3 is pretty enough here. And 3 is already quite a high value. Then as a next thing, I have the feeling that the scale for this material is not correct. So we just select all the textures here. And then in remap, we can adjust the scale. And the higher the number, the smaller the scale is. So I'm doubling the number. So the scale for the material will be 50% smaller. That's perhaps a little bit too small. So let's try out something like 1.7. And 1.7 looks pretty nice. And let's get a bit closer. And now I will try to illustrate you the difference, what is happening with the tessellation. So let's put this guy into the picture viewer. Select the Redshift tag again. Now we have one subdivision. Let's make it to 2. And let's give it a few samples. Put it into the picture viewer. And let's make it, wow, let's make it 3. I hope he didn't start to calculate 16. That's like, I would crash the PC probably. And let's also try 4. It's pretty hard to see actually in this example that the quality for the displacement would get definitely better with more tessellation. Perhaps we need for now just another displacement material which has a lot of information and a lot of details. And let's see. So I have another material now which is more like a noise and mud. And let's also scale it down a bit smaller. And let's go into displacement and go for a really high value. Then let's see. So we now still have 4 tessellation. Let's put that into the picture viewer. And in comparison to 1 tessellation, well, it's actually not as drastic as I thought. You just can see it in these little areas. I should open another scene, but Promise me or trust me, this is really very important to fine-tune your displacement. But if you are good with a small number, then definitely go with the small values, because then it renders quicker. But let's go back with my cloth material here. And this looks weird because obviously we have way too much displacement. And let's drop it down to something like 2. And then I would say it looks pretty nice. So let's try to give ourselves a very quick recap. We got the lights, the cameras, Redshift text, some render settings, some default settings, this menu, the camera tag's gone because of the last crash, but you don't need it, just if you want to apply the stuff which we talked about. And then in the material, there's a lot of stuff to adjust and play around. Well, I'm actually talking about all the stuff on Patreon, but perhaps one additional thing which I want to show you because it's so nice and like really quick, it's subsurface scattering. This is pretty new, and I know that Redshift had the random walk before, Octane did have the random walk before Redshift, but now it's also here and it's like super nice and quick to work with. Just a few adjustments. For a subsurface material, it's always nicer to have more light from the back. So I'm just adjusting a little bit from lights here. And so now we got yellow in the color and in the radius. Let's, I don't know, go for a red material. And now you can see how quickly and easy the scattering goes. You can adjust the amount of the scattering. So for example, now the cloth material is still pretty much in the game, but we have a little bit of scattering going on. You can go 100% and you can adjust the scale. So if you have a small value, you can see there are only very few areas where the scattering is happening. If you go with a higher value, like the whole object gets to scatter, and you can of course even go higher than the clip values here. And I don't know, let's go with some pinky. And you can see it's super intuitive and very quick. Yeah, and it's definitely fun to play around with. I would say for the other stuff, you can just play around or watch other tutorials, but in general, it's quite easy to see what is happening when you do something in here. But I would say at this point, this tutorial is already longer than expected, and I definitely want to say thanks to everyone who was watching this, and I hope to see you in the future and have a great time. Bye bye.